Welcome to Hope in the Face of Cancer, where we share real stories of courageous people in their cancer journey. Today's guest is someone who spent her career helping others find their way through life's most painful moments. Harriet Cabelly is a therapist, speaker, and author who specializes in grief and positive living. For years, she's guided people through loss, major life changes, and the long road to rebuilding. But in 2022, Harriet faced a new kind of personal turning point when she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Suddenly, the therapist known for helping others navigate adversity had to walk through it herself. What followed was not just a cancer journey, but a series of unexpected, deeply personal miracles that reshaped her life. In today's episode, Harriet opens up about what it was like to face cancer as a grief therapist, how she saw her way through all the uncertainty, and the surprising gifts that emerged along the way. Harriet, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Oh, thank you. That was some intro. I love it.
Wonderful. Well, you're some person.
I really liked how you termed all of that. I want to write it all down.
All right. Well, you'll have a recording of it. No.
Anyway, thank you so much for having me on.
It's such our pleasure, and I can't wait for our audience to get to know you more. And before we get into your cancer journey, I'd love to share with the audience a little bit about Harriet, pre-cancer. Kind of tell us a little bit about who you are and what made you tick.
Let's see where I start. I'm a wife, I'm a mommy, I'm a grandma.
Awesome.
I'm a ballroom dancer.
Wow.
I'm a therapist. I'm a lover of life. I love books, specifically memoirs. I love nature and being outdoors.
Oh, wow. You have a full life for sure.
I feel like I do, and I feel blessed that I do.
Amen to that. Absolutely. So tell us about the period of your life that you were in when you heard those words. Kind of what led up to this diagnosis and kind of where you were in your life.
Where I was in my life was in a great place in
Yeah.
terms of balance. We all love that word balance.
Right.
We oftentimes can't exactly balance, but I felt pretty balanced in terms
That's incredible.
in terms of work life and private
Yeah.
fun life.
Yeah.
So I felt that, and I felt good about it. Having said that, for the prior 4 months before my diagnosis, I was having some stomach issues, but that's kind of my weak link. And I've always had stomach stuff the last 20 years.
So you didn't think much of it.
I really didn't. I did go for endoscopy. It showed gastritis, nothing more. Okay. And then I had some other testing. I had H. pylori. I got it treated. Okay. And then one day, about 4 months later, I was doing my typical walk on the boardwalk. I'm blessed to live not too far from the ocean. So I walk on the boardwalk, and I couldn't walk.
Wow.
Like, what is this? I am so weak. This is not me. Anyway, we went to the emergency room. I thought it was just dehydration and I was in fluids. But unfortunately, they suggested a CAT scan, which I resisted because I had one a year ago and it was fine. But I did it. And hours later, the ER doctor, the poor ER doctor who's going to give the news, comes, like no news is good news.
Right.
So in this situation, no news was bad news.
Right.
And I'm standing there up and back to the bathroom with that silly hospital gown on with your rear end sticking out, going up and back because my nerves are like out of whack. And she came back and said, "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you because I don't even know you."
Yeah.
But the radiologist found a large mass sitting on 3 organs.
My goodness.
What? My immediate reaction was put me in hospice because it was 3 main organs. And I was like a stone.
Wow.
My husband's was like a water faucet. He was like crying. And I was obviously in shock. Yeah. And then basically they wheeled me upstairs. It was post-COVID, but not that far away from COVID. So he couldn't come up with me. And at midnight, I'm wheeled into this room with a snoring snoring roommate in the pitch dark. And I'm just left with this horrific pre-diagnosis. And I say pre because it ended up 6 days later being non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow.
Large B cell.
And that was in a crazy amount of waiting time too.
That was.
Yeah.
Well, I had to have stents put in because my bile ducts were blocked. So that took place, and the nurse had said to me, "Didn't you notice you were yellow?" And I said, "Not really, no."
Wow.
So it was all out of the blue. And I imagine most people, when they get cancer diagnoses, it is out of the blue.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, you are unique in that you counsel people, for a living. And I'm sure you counsel people who are going through traumas and, who are facing cancer. And, I'm curious, you looking at it from a therapist perspective about how would you assess yourself and how you reacted? And what would the therapist and you kind of tell you about, how you reacted?
Yeah, that's such an interesting, great question. I think, and even now looking back, I was in tremendous denial.
Yeah.
Not denial where I wasn't doing what I needed to do,
Yeah.
but denial in terms of keeping my emotions didn't really surface. I was kind
Mhm.
of numb. In
Yeah.
fact, I had a good friend say to me, whenever we talk, you're not even telling me how you feel. And it's like, how I feel? I don't even know how I feel. I'm just like
Right.
putting one foot in front of the
Right.
other.
Yeah.
And I had
That's all you
this
can do.
visual in my mind about like a horse, and I even made one of my coping cards. Talk about that after if you want, but
Yeah.
with a horse with blinders. And I
Mm.
felt like I was a horse, not looking peripherally, and just one foot in front of the other, do what I have to do, feelings devoid. And that's kind of how I cope through it. I will say, I was having anxiety here and there with my tremendous weight loss, and I had teeth
Yeah.
problems. But for the most part, I just did what I had to do and then incorporated a lot of my tools
Yeah.
to cope day to day, like my positive psychology tools, the stuff
Yeah.
I would work on with people,
Yeah.
with clients.
Yeah. You had a toolbox to draw from just from,
Yeah, I
your
kind of did.
profession. Yeah.
I kind of
Absolutely.
did.
So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about the treatment stage. What was treatment like for you and, how did you find strength, throughout that process?
Yeah. So my treatment, it was called EPOC. It was EPOC treatment. It was 6 rounds every 3 weeks. And with each round, I had to have a lumbar puncture. And that
Mhm.
wasn't very fun at all,
Yeah.
to say the least. And I was able, after the first round of treatment, which was in hospital, I was able to do the other 5 outpatient.
Oh, wow. That's nice.
Yeah. So, and I was a little nervous about that. My oncologist encouraged me, and she said, you're basically a very healthy person despite cancer. And she really thought you'll be able to do it. And this way, you're not hooked up for 5 days in a hospital bed, because my treatment was being hooked up 5 days for chemo and then 2 weeks off. So for the 5 days at home, I walked around with like a little fanny pack.
Yeah.
It was, going in me for the 5 days, and it was attached to me. So I walked around like that. And then I had the 2 weeks off.
Hmm.
So that was kind of the actual protocol of my treatment. And one of the miracles that I was even recognizing as I was going through each treatment phase was it was all going smoothly. The machine never beeped. I never had problems where I had to like run back to the hospital to say, oh my God, what's going on? Because I was nervous about that. Like, what
Right.
if something goes wrong?
Yeah. Being in your own hands is a little frightening.
Very frightening.
Yeah.
It's like, this one, each time it went smooth for
Mhm.
that round was like, oh, I'm grateful for that one. That
Yeah.
went smooth.
Do you
So
think that that
I
built your
tried to take,
confidence?
yeah, and I tried to take each one as it came
Yeah.
and just be grateful for
Yeah.
that one.
One day at a time.
Yeah, one treatment at a time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, as a trained therapist, do you feel like the therapist in you really ever kind of took over, or was this just one of these experiences where, it was Harriet the therapist was aside from Harriet the patient?
I think it went tandem.
Okay.
I think it went tandem because I really pulled on day to day. Um, I'm going to say again, positive psychology
Yeah.
tools of being very intentional, of trying to bring bits of joy into my day to day life, of trying to see myself as someone beyond a sick patient.
Mm.
Like that's a part of me, but it's not all of me, even though at the time you're going through treatment and you feel like hell, it is all of you. But eventually, after a couple of months, I started to feel like I could feel more than just the sick patient. Not that I wasn't still feeling crummy. In fact, if anything, as the treatments went on, I was really feeling worse. But in terms of my mindset, I was trying to bring some of that in. And if I could just say, Viktor Frankl, his logotherapy, I studied it and it informs my work and my practice. And that's, again, the same friend that I mentioned before, Eve, said to me also at the beginning, do what you tell others in terms of you have a lousy circumstance, but how are you going to respond to it? And she reminded me, and it was like that became my grounding. We don't have control over what happens to us, over our adverse circumstances, but we absolutely have control over how we respond to it. And that became my guidepost.
Yeah.
So if I could, can I just read the quote? Because
please. Yeah, sure.
Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And therein lies our power. You know, we're powerless when we get these types of diagnoses or these horrible things that happen, but we're not powerless in how we handle it and how we choose to respond. And I think that's an important message because we can choose how to respond.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes hand in hand with, the taking it one day at a time, one step at a time, and not trying to look too far down the road because that can be so overwhelming. I think that goes hand in hand with just how you respond.
Absolutely. Because when you look down the road, that's anxiety provoking.
Absolutely.
That's what anxiety is. It's future worry.
Yes.
And that was where I worked the hardest at trying to maintain being very present.
Yeah.
Was like very intentional. I put up like this mental stop sign in my mind. So every time I started thinking, how am I going to last till round 4? I'm losing so much weight. I'll just die from loss of weight. I would really try to visualize and put the brakes on and say, no, we're not going down there. We're here. And let's just do this one day at a time. Like you said, 1 week at a time, one cycle at a time.
Did that make you feel a little bit more in control, by putting those boundaries up?
Definitely. Yeah. Yes, it did. And it quelled. Listen, you can't get away from feeling anxiety.
Right.
You got to do things to help you manage it. And I'm not one to take medicine, so I was not going to take anti-anxiety medication on top of everything else I was taking. I had a whole cocktail. I said, let me see if I could do this naturally. I had a friend who would do guided meditations with me on the phone. So I really was trying to be very intentional about managing.
You obviously have a toolbox that many of us haven't been exposed to draw from in your experience. I'm curious what your thoughts would be around a patient, going through having someone to talk to, talking to a therapist during treatment. Is that too overwhelming? Certainly after treatment, I've definitely heard a lot of, our clients and volunteers who talk about after treatment was when they needed that emotional support the most because you're so focused on treatment and getting through day by day. It's after that you really start to emotionally process everything. What's your perspective on that?
Definitely. In fact, it's interesting because it was after treatment, like you said, that I started to cry much more.
Yeah.
I would say, well, what? Why am I crying now? But
I'm already on the other side of it. Yeah.
Right. But I will say that I did want some support during treatment and I wanted to be in therapy, but not the typical therapy.
Right.
And not, people said, oh, join a support group.
Yeah.
I did not want a support group. I didn't want to sit and listen to everyone else's horror stories. So I found a creative arts therapist, someone from a website who I so clicked with. And it was the best thing that happened to me because our therapy was based around creating pieces of art. And I'm not an artist, but just doing whatever types of crafts or even some of my cards and processing it like that. And it was, I found it incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. I think it's important just to find whatever, works for you, because there are people who the support groups are
Definitely.
are hugely meaningful to know that you're not alone, that you're
Right.
connecting with other people, but everyone is different, and not to
Right.
give up with the first thing you try to
Right.
help you cope, through
Definitely.
the
And to
experience.
listen to yourself and realize, like, for me, no, I didn't want the support group route.
Right.
And
Yeah, and everyone's different.
yeah, definitely.
Everyone's different.
Right.
This journey, you channeled, I think, this journey. Um,
I'm sorry, say the word
I
again.
said you channeled this
Oh, channel.
journey
Yeah. Yeah.
um, into a book. So tell us a little bit about, how this came to be, and what this book is about.
Okay. So, first of all, I wrote the book 2 years post-treatment.
Okay.
And
Yes.
I didn't
Yeah.
journal during my treatment, even though people said journal, write notes. I did none of that. And I, I have a grandson who would say to me, are you gonna write a book? Are you gonna help people? Because I actually wrote a book
Yeah.
7 years ago, another book on living well despite adversity.
Yeah.
And he said, you got to write a book about your cancer so you can help other people. And then, that's not me. And then as I said before, I'm an avid reader, and I read a memoir of a woman who went through cancer, and she herself was a therapist.
Wow.
And so she wrote it from both perspectives.
Yeah.
And it really resonated. I said, oh, this is really interesting. Maybe I could do something like that. So that memoir kind of inspired me to put pen to paper and say, I'm gonna give this a try. And that was 2 years later. I
Hmm.
put it out there. I immediately, like when you put out, sometimes you
Yeah.
get back. Someone connected me with someone else who was a kind of a local small publishing company. I immediately hooked with that woman. And in 6 months, we had the book.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So
So
it's like it has to be the right time and meant to be.
absolutely.
And
Yeah, absolutely. I love that perspective too, kind of the dual insights of patient and therapist, through that journey.
yeah.
So tell us a little, give us a couple glimpses of some of the key things that you talk about in the book, or, if you had to give a synopsis of, what you want that book to stand for, tell us a little bit more about that.
So it's my personal journey, and it is depicted basically through my 10 miracles as I perceive
Mhm.
them to be. Because
Wow.
after my treatment, I started like taking just some notes, gratitude notes, and I ended up writing down, I had a lot of things to be grateful for. And it ended up being 10.
Wow.
And when I decided to write after I read that other woman's memoir, I said, well, this is interesting. Maybe I can structure my book around my 10
Yeah.
miracles. And that's the chunk of the book. And that's kind of how the story is told. And then the second part, it's a small book, it's not a big book, are my coping cards that I created with my arts therapist,
Oh, wow.
and the professional tools and concepts and insights, for others to possibly, glean from or grab some tools from. So it's kind of the personal and the
Yeah.
professional blended like that.
Can you share one of these 10 with us?
Oh yeah, I could do a funny one.
Okay.
Funny one. Not so funny, but it was fun. It's funny when I talk about it. The vomit miracle.
Oh my goodness. That's a miracle? What?
Right. That's why my editor said, we're not putting the words in like that. We're gonna put it on a more universal level, like the mirror. I don't even know what she called it, but it was not called the vomit miracle.
Oh my
That
goodness.
is what the little 2-page chapter is.
Yeah.
I have a terrible fear of growing up.
Yeah.
And when my oncologist came in to tell me what my treatment would be, and I was like shy, almost to a point that I wasn't even going to ask it. And then I said, of course you're going to ask the question. And I said, I'm a little embarrassed to say, but is this the kind of chemo that's going to make me throw up? Because I have a horrific fear.
Yeah.
That's like bigger than anything else, is fear of throwing up. And
Wow.
she laughed and she said, it's not really that type of cocktail you're going to get. However, you're going to have anti-nausea medication. So I strongly recommend you always take it prophylactically. Never wait till you're nauseous, because then it's too late. And there was some funny episode on Jerry Seinfeld from years back where he had a whole thing about he remembered the last time he threw up, like 9 years ago, 6 months ago, and 4 days ago. So I thought of that and I kind of put that in. I said, see, even Jerry Seinfeld, he remembers. the last time because it was so important to him. Anyway, so in the end, I never threw up once.
Wow.
So to me, that was huge because
And
it
that
was
big fear that, yeah.
yes. And sometimes you think your greatest fear becomes reality because you're so afraid that you almost, it almost brings it on. But no. So I look and said, wow, that is a miracle.
That is a miracle. I love that. And I love how, and maybe after 2 years, you reflected back and just saw, those miracles of the journey. We ask all of the survivors and caregivers who become volunteers for CanCare, we ask them in training, what gift did cancer give you? And most of them at first think we're a little crazy by that. But, truly, when you look back, there's something that positively changed your life. And if you have 10 miracles, you certainly believe that there were gifts from the experience. What would the biggest gift be for you from your cancer journey?
The idea of such gratitude for my life, because when I was given that original diagnosis in the ER, I really thought this was it. And I said to my husband, if this is it, I want to go into hospice. Mm-hmm. And I kind of went through a mental checklist in my mind the next couple of days. And I was thinking, going over my life, and I didn't want to go to the why me. And I said to myself, it's not that I'm scared of dying, but I really love life and I don't want to die yet. So that put together with the fact that I came through this well, such gratitude that for me, my mantra now, every morning when I wake up and I do my little meditation, it's, I just want to pay it forward.
Yeah.
Give me, and I'll pray and I'll say, just give me the opportunity, lead me towards ways that I could just pay forward the gift of my life.
Yeah.
Be it a book, be it speaking, be it counseling, whatever. And that's kind of the gift, right?
That's beautiful.
Of having a renewal and saying, what am I going to do with it? Because if I could just read you one thing from the book, it's a quick line. I love this line. And I didn't say, if you have to go through hell, don't come out empty-handed.
Oh, that's good.
And I really live by that. It's like, you're going to go through hell. Don't just resume your life. Do something now, forward thinking, different. Do something good and useful out of it. Otherwise, it's like a waste.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. That is very powerful. So for those who I know, and myself included, want to pick up this book and get more of these insights, what is the name of the book and how can we find it?
It's called Light Through Darkness, Miracles Along My Cancer Journey, and it's on Amazon.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for blessing the world with that. What would you like to leave our listeners today with? If there was one message to those that may be facing cancer today or who are on the other side of their treatment, those who might be caregivers, what would that message be?
Hope. Yeah. Holding on to hope with a capital H, and working on your own healing, whatever that looks like. Because as we know, it's not just healing, curing from an illness, because I don't look at curing from cancer. Maybe you're in remission, but there's always that fear of recurrence. But working on ourselves from the inside out so that we can really have the best life we can with the time that we have. Yeah. So, and I like to say, how some people say I'm a cancer survivor. So I like to say I'm a cancer thriver.
Yes.
Because I think that adds to the quality of the life that we still have to take it on with a sense of urgency and exuberance.
That's beautiful, Harriet. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your message of hope and learnings with our audience today.
Thanks for having me. And your questions were great. I loved it.
Well, it was a lot of fun. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Hope in the Face of Cancer. If you or someone you love is facing cancer, CanCare is here to support you. Visit us at cancare.org to learn more. Until next time, remember, there is always hope in the face of cancer. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hope in the Face of Cancer, a survivor by your side. If you or someone you know is facing cancer or is supporting a loved one through their journey, we invite you to share this podcast. Thank you for your support in our efforts in the cancer community. No one should face cancer alone.